why am I feeling this way? What is the root cause? Okay, I'm feeling alone and I'm feeling isolated. Okay, reverse engineering this. What would someone need to do so that me and others like me would not feel this way?
Welcome to the broadcast. This is Mike Lee's In Context, and it's my treat to have co-authors with me today. The book is called One Body, One Spirit. I'll hold it up. We'll have information in the show notes as always. But Dr. Paul Pettit serves as the Director of Career Services. He teaches in the Pastoral Ministries Department at Dallas Theological Seminary. Paul's background was a sportscaster, an author, and a speaker. He and his wife Pamela co-authored Congratulations, You're Gonna Be a Dad in Kriegel Press. He's also written Dynamic Dads, How to Be a Hero to Your Kids, a Tyndale publication. Congratulations, You've Got Tweens by Kriegel, and Foundations for Spiritual Formation, also a Kriegel academic publication. And they live in the Dallas area. He has a degree from University of Kansas, Moody Bible Institute, advanced study programs, a master's and doctoral degree from Dallas Seminary. He likes coaching emerging leaders. God bless you, brother. He and his wife, who also is a neonatal nurse practitioner, have 5 adult kids and 4 grandchildren. And our other guest is B. Jason Epps. He earned his THM from Dallas Seminary, where he and Paul met. He is a PhD resident in Old Testament at Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. He's working on that dissertation paper as we talk, bless his heart. And he also serves as an adjunct professor at Midwestern Seminary. He lives in Missouri along with his service dog, Virgo, but unfortunately he recently had cancer and passed. No.
So yeah,
I'm sorry.
That's like recent, as of like 3 weeks ago it happened. So
that's tough, man.
Yeah.
Wow. How long had he been with you?
About 4 years. So
okay.
The hardest thing with the service dog is you take them everywhere.
Yeah.
So everybody that sees you, it's like sees you with them, and everybody, like for instance at church, was like, "Where's Virgo? Where's Virgo? I miss him. What happened?" And we just had to tell the story 1,000 times, which is its own sort of difficulty. But we're in the process of getting a new service dog, and we've been working with an agency, and they said I should have one by March. Actually.
Oh wow!
So,
well, good. That's something to look forward to. You can't replace them though. They're all
no.
Yeah. It's like. Jason has lived with cerebral palsy his whole life, and he created something we're going to talk about in the book today called the 5-Step Plan. And let's back up and talk about how the two of you met. I'll toss it to you first, Paul.
Well, this is a story of a professor and a student. I was teaching preaching, and Jason was late because we went through the roster, and it's that first day of class, and everybody's nervous. And I thought, where's B. Jason Epps? And I heard this faint rap on the door, and big wooden doors at Dallas Seminary, and 2 guys helping him, and he rolled into my class in a power wheelchair. And I thought, wow, this is going to be different, because in our classes for preaching, we have a stage.
Yeah.
We're all thinking, how's he going to get up on the stage? The pulpit was way over his head, and I just began to see the whole seminary through his eyes, Michael. I began to see the classes, the social interactions, walking around campus here, and it was really a new opening for me to see the whole campus, the way we run everything here at Dallas Seminary through his eyes.
It is a literal eye-opening experience. So Jason, tell me your side of that story. So you bump into Dr. Pettit's class, and you go, who's this professor?
Well, I kind of really knew what I was getting myself into, because, like I had said, I've been working with cerebral palsy all my life, and I had done a previous preaching course at Moody Bible Institute where I got my undergrad. So we're all Moody people here. Paul's a Moody guy, you're a Moody guy, except I was in Dreyer, he was in Colby, but God breaks down even those dividing walls. That's at least our inside joke, for those of you that know. But the amazing thing was, for years, I had this idea, this plan rolling around in my head ever since I was a sophomore at Moody, and God really imprinted upon me, had me basically figure out, why was I feeling so lonely? Why was I feeling so isolated? Because it came to me at a time when I was in the hospital for 8 weeks, and I basically had to take a medical withdrawal and drop all my courses, because after spending 8 weeks in the hospital, except for one course, and that was Greek exegesis, and that was because of one Ron Sauer. So he personally tutored me. He really showed me great pastoral care and academic excellence. So he was very formative, and it's just a person that I always hold near and dear to my heart. But for a long time, when I had formulated this idea and I kept telling people about it, everybody said, "Oh, you should write a book. Oh, you should write a book." And I had that in the back of my mind, but I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where to start. I'm like, how does this even work? So Paul, I don't know if you want to share this, but he basically starts every class saying, "Hey, I've written a book. If you have an idea, you could write a book. Come to me and I'll help you." So my hand shot up and I'm like, I have an idea. I've formulated it. I've started a Moody student group with this stuff. I'm ready and raring to go. And to Paul's credit, he actually followed through. Because so many people, in my experience, have said, "Oh yeah, we're going to do this. We're going to help you." And it never materializes into anything. But Paul actually essentially made it happen. So this book would not be in existence if it wasn't for Paul, and just his tenacity and, breaking down doors with the publisher and nagging them relentlessly.
Yeah.
Well, he kind of did that to me a little bit, Jason. We were at the seminary not long ago, and he was, kindly in my face going, "Hey, I got a book you need," and he's talking about my podcast, which is the guise for, "Hey, how have we done your podcast?" But all in good form. You mentioned Sauer. Boy, I wasn't there long, but your story is probably replicated hundreds of times over the life of Moody. Kids who have some challenges, emotionally, family, financial, whatever, and Sauer is there. He is just a prince of a guy ministering to a lot of students that might have some unique challenges other than the mainstream person, not just physically, but any kind of. And he's very endeared. The students are very endeared to him. So, and his wife as well.
Oh yeah, his wife especially. Yeah, yep. I formed a wonderful relationship with them both. Unfortunately, he's now retired. So
yep. Oh, fortunate for him. There's a time.
Yeah, time and a season for everything.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me kind of give folks a highlight of the book. And, we've had John Erickson Tata on the program numerous times and just recently as well. But what I appreciate about your book, it's not this overarching ADA implementation and compliance. Anyone who's been in a church or a school, you've got to have a certain number of, ADA check the box parking spaces and ramps and so forth. But as Paul, as you pointed out, a third floor classroom with 4 or 5 steps to a preaching stage behind a big podium, that's not in the ADA manual. So, but what you've done, let me give folks a highlight. You've broken it down into disabilities in the local church, biblical solutions, and then you have the 5-step plan for building genuine friendship. I want to jump primarily to the biblical solutions, because I thought this was unique in other literature I've read, that you actually went back to Scripture and talked through some of the disability issues. I'll leave that for both of you to jump in and make a comment or two.
Well, we found that the heart of Father God is always for the brokenhearted. We found that Jesus often was ministering to those with disabilities. So you can't open up the pages of Scripture without bumping into people that are heartbroken, they're suffering, people that have disabilities, people that have illnesses, and God is always for those people. We overlook them sometimes. There's apparently a professor in an Ivy League school right now, I won't mention his name. He's started this crusade that people with disabilities should be classified as not fully human. I mean, that's where we're at in 24, where somebody might say, well, they have a disability. What can they really contribute? But God has created each one of us with his image. We're all image bearers. We've all been created in the Imago Dei. So each person, disabled, able-bodied, we have a gift. We have a purpose. And so that scriptural search for me was really enlightening, because I knew Jesus did miracles, but I didn't know that so much of Scripture is filled with people who are brokenhearted and suffering.
And if you look closely, all throughout the Old and New Testament, it's not just caring for the people's physical needs. It's caring for their emotional, social needs more than anything else. I mean, that's one of the reasons why Ruth didn't let Naomi go. It's because she knew she was going through, she needed somebody to actually be there and socially support her, in addition to physically support. And in fact, one thing I want to touch on is, you mentioned the physical accessibility, like stages, doors, ramps, and all those are important. But I just want to really emphasize that there's also another type of barrier that we talk about in the book that is often overlooked, and that's social barriers. That's, okay, the church may be physically accessible, but is the person with the disability ignored? And let me put it one step forward. I often found that the social aspect is much more important than the physical. Why do I say that? Well, in several of my outings with the men's choir at Moody Bible Institute, one of the fun events that I got to do when I was a senior, a lot of these churches were completely accessible. There was a church, I won't mention its name, but it's very famous, where there's like 1 million steps up to the choir loft. There was no way that church was going to be able to make it ADA compliant. But because I had friends, and because they basically did the, lame man through the thatch house kind of thing, they were able to lift me in a manual chair up Lord knows how many steps and fit me in there. So oftentimes it's the social, and it's this genuine friendship that overcomes, more barriers than you could even think. And the amazing thing about that is you don't really have an excuse, because with physical adaptations, there's an excuse. Oh, we don't have enough money. There's an issue with the building. We can't physically make it, but there is no excuse to not having genuine friendship. And it's free. All it costs is your time. And that's what Jesus often did in his miracles. He slowed down. He spent time with people. He didn't say, oh, I've got 1 million things to do. I only have 3 years to do it on this earth. He probably knew that, but he took his time. He showed genuine care and concern. So that is our focus and heartbeat of the book, that it's not just a one-size-fits-all program where everybody gets shoved into a room, but it's genuinely working with the person, because each individual with a disability has their own unique issues and own unique situations of their life. When we were on with Michael Easley, Chris Fabry, sorry, too many people. But when we were on with Chris Fabry, one of the callers was expressing that they had trouble getting a trustee for a special needs trust. I totally understand that, because I had to do that. But it's no longer a main issue for me, because that thing was accomplished for me. So it even varies, not even by disability, but by stage of life, which is why we didn't want this book to be prescriptive in such of trying to catch everything. We wanted to give a broad plan that you could apply and ask questions and learn what the individual person needs, so that it would be flexible and so that it would be effective no matter what disability or even just in general person, because everyone, regardless of if they're disabled or, as Paul loves to say, temporarily able-bodied, because we're all slowly decaying. We all need this genuine friendship. We all need genuine love and care.
Mm-hmm.
That is at the core of what we need and desire as human beings. That's why our hearts are restless until they find rest in God.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to come back to more of that in your 5-step plan, but I do want to push back a little bit in the Old and New Testaments, because when I was first reading through your book, I'm thinking of Mephibosheth. And I'm thinking of ostensibly the first disabled person that we specifically hear probably had a broken neck as a child, right? Is for those that may not know the story, it's Saul's grandson, correct? It's a grandson of Saul's. And David, the new king, says, is there any kindness that he can show to the house of Saul? And Paul, why don't you can pick up that story. So he finds out about this guy named Mephibosheth.
He begins to sit at the king's table. I mean, a place of honor, a place of inclusion, such grace. Dr. Swindoll used to always talk about Mephibosheth, and it's hard enough to pronounce, but the story is a beautiful story because Mephibosheth could have been out on the streets. There was no Social Security. There was no welfare. Obviously, you could glean on the edges of the fields. But Mephibosheth is elevated to sit and dine with the king, with the king's family, at the king's table. So it's a beautiful picture of remembering and knowing that Saul's family legacy was cared for by the kindness of David, and that Mephibosheth was elevated in that sense to being fully human, fully part of the family, and Mephibosheth expresses that too. He's, sees God's grace, sees God's hand in action.
You mentioned New Testament. I'm thinking through chronicling all the miracles in my mind that were physical miracles, deafness, blindness, lameness, and so forth. And I'm always struck by the old man that was 38 years waiting at the pool, and Christ questioned to him, "Do you want to get well?" And that guy's answer is like the most disappointing, anticlimactic answer on the planet. He complains. He complains about his circumstance. He complains about his condition. And, not just a literal physical disability, Jason, but, curmudgeony, depression, people that are just ornery people in nature. I know them because I are one. They're just ornery by nature. And it's like, yeah. Instead of saying, here's the great physician, there's not just solving your physical issue, but your spiritual disability, right, Paul?
Yeah.
Jason?
Yeah, and in fact, it's really easy to, having a physical disability, to get really embittered. So many of the books that Paul and I read through, at least this was my feeling on it, maybe Paul has a different feeling, but so many of them was just complaining and just saying how it's like how horrible this is and how horrible I've been treated, with no sense of charity or positive nature. That's why I, kind of sit down with Paul and I said, look, I don't want this to be a book that complains and makes people feel bad, guilts them into doing something. That's not good at all. We want something that would build up the church, that would edify the church, that would say, you're missing something here. I mean, it's like 1 in 4, 1 in 5 people with disabilities, according to the CDC, and it's and a lot of churches aren't even aware of that. So I mean, it's something that we need to talk about, that we need to discuss, and that we need to proactively pursue. And the other thing is that we wanted to actually provide a solution in the book. Because one of my biggest pet peeves in doing all the reading that I did through my undergrad, graduate, and now my doctorate is there's all these books that tell you about a problem and nobody gives any sort of solution. None whatsoever. And it's like, what good is that? Okay, it's like, okay, I know there's a problem internationally for pastors being trained. True story. We had several lectures of that when I was at Dallas Theological Seminary, and I would raise my hand up I agree with you. What can we do? And they're like, we're just trying to gain interest. And I'm just like, okay, gaining interest is fine, but you should have some idea of like how we could actually plug into the ministries that are doing this, because I know there are some. It's just like the book writing. It's like I don't know who I connect to or how to connect to. So, yeah.
Well, and for our viewers and listeners, this is a very accessible book that you guys have put together. It's not a tome. It's not hard to read through, and that does transition into your 5-step plan for building genuine friendships. And as I understand that this was your framework, Jason. This is what you came up with, correct?
Yes. Yeah. So again, when I was at Moody and I had to take the 8-week sabbatical or medical withdrawal, actually, I was feeling very alone, very isolated, and I began to do some real soul searching, and asking myself, why am I feeling this way? What is the root cause? Okay, I'm feeling alone and I'm feeling isolated. Okay, reverse engineering this. What would someone need to do so that me and others like me would not feel this way? Because just complaining and saying, I'm alone, I'm feeling isolated, I'm not feeling included, I'm not feeling genuinely loved by the church that I'm in, that just saying that doesn't really help. So I started formulating that, talking to people about it. The people with disabilities that I talked to were really gravitating toward it. I actually started a student group at Moody called Bonded for that express purpose. I don't know if it's still going on because it's been, oh gosh, I graduated in 2016. So years. I went to Moody. I didn't take any math. You know this. We don't do math at Moody. Somebody else can do math.
And Jason, you were finding your identity sometimes in your academic pursuits, isn't that right?
Yeah. That was the real shocker when I had to take the medical withdrawal. I discovered that I was basically diving myself into the most difficult classes at Moody Bible Institute just to cover up my own pain. My major was in a field that most people run from. I got a degree in biblical languages. So I took 2.5 years of Greek, 2.5 years of Hebrew. And basically when I ended up at Dallas, I'm like, okay, why didn't I get a master's degree from Moody? Because it's except for the electives, a lot of it was, and except for the Bible exposition department at Dallas Theological Seminary, which is just absolutely fantastic. Everything else I had covered like 100% at Moody.
So you were that guy in our Hebrew and Greek classes that we all hated.
Yeah, set the curve, broke the curve.
Yeah.
Well, no, actually, I really struggled with Hebrew and Greek, and that's why.
But at Dallas. But I'm saying by the time you got to Dallas, you had it under your belt.
Yeah.
But
I knew a few of those.
But you were saying to me during the research for this book, I was finding my identity in academics. You were saying I was sort of hiding behind the academics to hide my pain.
Yep. 100%.
So this 5-step plan: notice, engage, research, incorporate, and advocate.
Yep.
So notice, obviously, pretty simple, right? We notice those around us. We notice those are hurting, or maybe a physical disability is easy to notice, right?
Yeah, it's not just actually noticing the person, it's noticing the surrounding. Is there anybody that's separated off from the main group? For instance, in the SDR, I'm just going to use that because it's a space that
Student
we're all
dining room.
Yeah. So they had these long tables that were squished together. Yep. And I could sit at any of the tables height-wise, but the way that they were positioned, I could only go to the tables that were like at the end of all these other rows and only on one side. Well, for a large majority of the time, everybody else liked to sit at the closer tables. So unless I guilted people into sitting with me, I was often left alone. So, I mean...
Well, one of my observations in reading your book was, and it's always for an able person, if that's a fair descriptor, it may be unkind or unfair, not meant to be. When you see someone in a wheelchair or with arm braces or whatever, polio, helping them is a little bit dicey. Because I've always opened doors for people. That's always. I mean, I still open my door on my truck for my wife. I was taught that is what you do. It's a courtesy. And to this day, if I see someone in a wheelchair or a walker or whatever, I'm over there. Mm-hmm. There's a high percentage of time people are offended. I've had more than one occasion, Jason, where someone has kind of scowled at me for helping them. And then I apologize. Sorry, I just thought you need a hand. So maybe that's not a common experience, but when I look at people that might have a little bit challenging time getting in and out of somewhere, my inclination is to help. Now, not trying to build myself up, but at the same time, some people are very uncomfortable taking that initiative to say, hey, let me go help Jason get over there to that table.
Yeah, so this is where step 2 actually comes into play. Engage, and the key part there is to ask questions. Ask, hey, do you need help getting in? Because sometimes they can and they want to do it. It's one of the few things that they could do for themselves, and it allows them to regain a bit of their humanity back. So asking questions is the key. In fact, a big part of our conversation in the book was Paul bringing up all of these concerns about what in this particular circumstance, what about this rare circumstance? And I had to stop him there. I'm like, Paul, just have a conversation. Just mention it. Just dialogue about your concerns. So for instance, in my example, if you see a person sitting alone in the lunchroom or, church fellowship hall or whatever, come up to them and say, hey, I was noticing you're sitting alone. Would you like me to sit with you? Because sometimes people want to be alone, but you shouldn't just assume they want to be alone. So it's just engaging and asking, because it varies by person to person. That's why we didn't want to create a one size fits all situation for this book.
The one I talk about is helping Jason get into a van. I mean, I was putting up these objections. I don't want to touch you. I don't want to grab you inappropriately. I don't want to break something. And he was like, Paul, you might just say, do you need help getting in the van? And when he broke it down like that, I was like, yeah, that's a better question. Yeah. Hey, Jason, do you need any help getting in the van? I was so worried about all these things, and he just broke it down and just made it very organic and very real.
Love it. Well, and I mean, in the economy of language in general, isn't that a lot of our hang up? Just ask the question and be candid about it. And you might say something inappropriate, but you work through it. What's the research section about?
So the research actually has 2 stages. It's where the person who's able-bodied, the potential friend, or as I like to call them, the handler, does research and notices the areas where the person with the physical disability can go. Because oftentimes people with physical disabilities especially don't really know where we could go in the community, because we don't have the freedom to experiment. I mean, especially if I can, throw Chicago lightly under the bus. In Chicago, and I've never been in another city like this, there are sidewalks with a ramp down into the street, but across the street a few feet, there's not a ramp back up onto the sidewalk. Or you're going to love this. Not only are the elevators constantly being broken, which is a problem, and they smell horrible, but I bet you didn't know this. On the map for the L system, there are places that are marked as accessible. And when I went there, actually on my first time trying to get back to O'Hare from Booney by myself, and my friend who was helping me with the luggage and everything, we're like, there's no elevator up to the station. And he walked down the steps and said, where's the elevator? And they're like, there never has been an elevator. But oftentimes even calling doesn't accomplish it, because I've called places and they're like, yeah, sure, we're accessible. You get there and the step is a mile high. So that's why it's important for somebody to actually either A, notice the areas that would potentially be accessible, or that's passive research. Active research requires a little bit more work. It's where you say, I know Jason likes musicals, for instance. I'm going to see if there's an accessible route to this concert hall. And they would go along the route to check that it was accessible. They wouldn't just assume it was accessible. Or just say, oh, because there's stairs here, it's inaccessible, because sometimes there's a way around it. Sometimes there's a back entrance. Sometimes you can just use a plank of wood to get across those steps. There's a whole lot of creative things that you could do, but you need time to figure it out. You can't just spur of the moment, hey, we're going here. I can't tell you how many times when I was in the dorm and people were like, hey, let's go here. And I'm like, did we check into this? Did we check into that? Did we check this? Did we check that? And finally they just stopped asking me, because they're like, you're too much work. And that was actually like the undercurrent of Dryer. But Dryer guys are sports guys, you know. They just care about wrestling and blowing horns at 2 a.m. in the morning when it's right before a final and you're trying to get some decent sleep.
But you're not bitter, yeah?
Yeah, let it go, Jason. Let it go.
Tell us how you really feel, yeah. When you're mentioning Chicago sidewalks, you know, of course, I spent, what did Ziggy say? Today I spent a week in O'Hare. Yeah.
Yeah.
But just going anywhere in that city is challenging for ambulatory people as well. So I can't imagine the levels of complexity. Okay. The fourth step of incorporating.
So incorporate is really unique, because what normally happens is well-meaning people go to the person with a disability and say, hey, what would you like to do with us? There are two problems with that. One, oftentimes, by the very nature of our lives, we've been forced to isolate ourselves. So we don't know what we could do with the larger group. So we don't have any ideas. Two, even if we do have an idea, if the group doesn't regularly do it, we feel like if we were to mention it without any buy-in, they would not genuinely want to do it. In fact, one time when I was at Moody, the RA basically coerced everyone into playing a, role-playing card game, which I could do. And in the middle of it, when they had been playing this game night and it was set for 3 hours and it was a 30-minute game, the guy said, when is this going to be over so that we could get back to what we want to do? So a big part of incorporate is the handler, the person that's been doing all this research, that's been building this relationship, that's been talking with the person with a disability, goes to the larger group and says, hey, Jason can do this because of this, and this. Do we as a group want to do it? And then you come to the person with the disability, the asset, and say, hey, we as a group want to do this. I've checked into these areas, this, and this. I'll be there to help you. Those sort of things. Do you want to do it? And that puts the ball back into their court. And they know people will be there to show up. And 9 times out of 10, they'll say yes because they're starved for human interaction. On the flip side, when a person with a disability tries to go through all those steps and set something up, nobody shows up because it's just viewed as everybody else. It's just one more potential thing into the schedule. But psychologically, what does that do? It makes the person with a disability feel even worse. And I do want to back up slightly, a bit, back to step 2, where you're actually engaging. A key part of that step is you're learning what a person likes, what they dislike. Mm-hmm. You're asking them about their disability, how it affects them, because every person's disability affects them differently. Like I have several friends with the same disability I do, but some can walk, some require technological communication, and for better or for worse, I'm inseparable from my disability. Like my value isn't just my disability, but I can't separate myself from its limitations. And oftentimes, people with disabilities want to talk about their issues because, one, they know everybody, that's the elephant in the room, everybody's wanting to ask the question, but they don't have the gumption to do so because they're so uncomfortable. Or two, it's just they feel like they can't even tell about their struggles of the day because, people think when they're just mentioning just what happened today, what they're doing is complaining. So that kind of carries through, especially into step 4. And all these steps build on each other. They're sequential for a reason. You can't research unless you know what a person's disability is, how it affects them, their limitations, and what they even like. You can't come to the larger group with a suggestion unless you've done the research part. So.
As I'm hearing you talk, Jason, it really reminds me of the old adage of, if you want a good friend, be a good friend.
Yeah.
And it really is almost reductionistic. What does this person like? What don't they like? What are they interested in? What are they not? I've got, a long list of very close friends, and none of them are universal. We're friends in different areas. We're really close friends in audiophile. We're really close friends in, technology. We're really close friends in our history of backpacking and climbing and whatnot. But there, it would be a whole lot of these guys, and I for them. We have certain things in common and other things. And I think part of that's just a level of maturity for all Christians, saying, I'm not going to be all things to every friend, but I can be a friend in this way. And I presume the same is true for you, the way you look at these friendships.
Yeah. And for instance, one of the things that Paul and I functionally talked about is like, what if you don't click with a person? Like, what if, it's not a gender, that was one of his objectives. And I'm like, just be honest about it, because it's bad for them and it's bad for you if you're just forcing yourself to be their friend. I mean, the best case scenario, and then say, you know what, I really don't like the things you're interested in, but I know someone who is. Let me introduce you.
And it's even less confrontational than that. Say, hey, this isn't my bailiwick. I'm not a computer geek. I'm not a whatever. But to your point, the next step would be, I got a friend that really knows this stuff. And I think, Paul is a professor, and my role is primarily as a pastor. That's what we do, is we connect people with interests. And this person would be great in this area. My wife's a realtor, and if you need some remodeling done, she's got a short list of really good remodelers. Why wouldn't she say, hey, you can really trust Chris. You can really trust this person to do that good work for you. That's just a common decency, right? We don't have to elevate it into some super spiritual, you have to be kind to people with disabilities. Just be a friend.
Yeah. In fact, that kind of brings back to when I was initially telling one of my close friends about this, Noah Garza, and he's just like, why do you need to make it so complicated? You could just go up on the stage in Torrey Gray and say, be a friend, and roll off. Now, when he said roll off, we kind of laughed
Literally.
about it, because we said, oh, I'd just roll off the stage. And then that became a long discussion of how would the different majors react? The counseling majors would have this reaction. The music majors would be in their own little world. The theological majors would be like parsing the
100%.
Metaphysical intent. The biblical language guys would be parsing the individual words, trying to come up with roots.
Was rolling metaphorical? Was it literal? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about being an advocate, advocating for someone.
Yeah, so this really, again, varies by the person, but in general, it's standing up for the person. It's the idea of really going to bat for the person, and it really turns the whole world on its head. What do I mean by that? In the disability world, what we're constantly told from day one is you're your own advocate, you're your own advocate, you're your own advocate. Basically, you're the only one fighting this. It's you alone. You have to fight for every scrap of bread. And that's why I'm emotionally spent when I come to a non-priority situation. I've already spent hours arguing with the government, hours arguing with, the school to make sure certain things go well and I get the appropriate accommodations. I have no energy left for areas in the social aspect of things. And especially when I've put an effort in the past and it's not been reciprocated. And in fact, I've had people in disability ministries tell me, well, you just have to put forth the effort. And I would always think, why is it always one-sided? So it's that idea. It's you're actually stepping up for the person with the disability and just engaging with them and showing yourself and to really be on their side. And really the end result of this is helping to overcome a lot of the baggage that has just been swimming around a lot of people with disabilities for years, that they're not loved, that they're not cared for, that they're invisible. For the longest time, I was a believer because God, I don't know how he did it, but he supernaturally reached in to save me. I wasn't going into a Bible preaching church at all. I just read the Bible and I'm like, oh, yeah, I did go up in a Christian home. So I did have my mom's influence. So that was a wonderful thing. But in general, if it wasn't for that, if I just had to look at the church interaction alone, I probably wouldn't be a believer. Because especially early on, I just wasn't given the time of the day. They would say, go sit over here, you're in the way. All these, they would say, we want you to be here in their words, but in their actions was, we don't actually want you to be here. But we can't say that because we have to be good Christians, but, actions speak louder than words. Yeah. And one other final thing of how all this comes together. The end result of this is when you have the genuine friend, the handler say, hey, do you want to go to X place? Do you want to go to the Chicago Museum of Art? As a person with a disability, with somebody who's been executing these steps, I could just say yes. And it's just so freeing because I know that the person that I'm going with, she's taken care of everything. She's going to be there. She's going to make sure that, that everything is taken care of. She's not just going to take me there and just leave me alone, because oftentimes somebody would invite me someplace, make sure I would get there at the best times and just leave me alone by myself, and it's just I have no way of interacting with anybody. So I end up feeling worse because here I am alone in a room full of people. I knew I was alone and isolated before, but now it's like painfully in front of me. So thankfully that's not really been the case in several years, and most certainly not with people like Paul, who hold a dear place in my heart.
Well, Dr. Pettit, let me ask you to give us some final thoughts. I mean, the end of the book has an exceptional set of Q&A, like what to think about, and this is my problem, and what about some of the typical things that might be objections or questions, and you can kind of land the plane for us. Yeah,
I think what we're asking people to do is take the friendship challenge. Would you be willing to reach out to someone who has a disability and work at building an authentic, organic friendship with them? We want you to find somebody who maybe feels alone, or find someone who needs a hand, needs a help, and say, by God's grace, let's build a real friendship. I'm not being patronizing. I'm not just going to stop by once a week to check a Christian box. Let's become friends. And that way you can build up through those 5 steps, and you can, like Jason and I have, become real friends. I feel like I'm an advocate now for Jason. And I was reading about Jesus being our advocate. And Jesus being our advocate means he goes before us. He paves the way. And not only did Jesus go before us, but he's with us. Jesus is our advocate, but he also enters into our suffering. He enters into our pain with us. And so sometimes when I'm with Jason, I think, hold on, Jason doesn't want to go to the Cowboys game. Okay. He doesn't want to go to AT&T Stadium and try to get on the right elevator and try to sit for 3 hours and watch those Dallas Cowboys. But if somebody said, hey, do you want to go to a Jason Bourne movie? Do you want to go to a Lord of the Rings movie? I would say, oh, Jason's going to be all over that. He loves, in fact, he uses the term handler and asset. And, I fought for me being the asset. I felt like I should be the asset. He wanted to be the asset. But so to sum it up, I would say buy this book, but take the friendship challenge. That's our real challenge to listeners, to viewers, to readers. Would you be willing, by God's grace, to pray for an opening where you could say, I've been noticing this person. I've been observing. I've been noticing. I'm ready to engage. And I want to really try to build an authentic, organic friendship with this person and just see where it leads, see where God takes it.
Yeah, and it's really a mindset. That's what we want this book to be. We want this book to be the first point of exposure that maybe somebody has to this, so that they could begin thinking about it differently and just seeing it in new eyes. That's why we really want pastors and Christian leaders to get a hold of this, because it'll trickle down then. Because it is a bottom-up approach. It's not a top-down approach. So hopefully with this book and with the grace of God's Spirit, we can transform churches in America and around the world to be more like Christ.
That's a great place to land. One body, one spirit, disability, and community in the church. Dr. Paul Pettit and almost Dr. B. Jason Epps, thanks for your time, and keep pressing on, and pray that God will use this in great ways, surprising ways for the kingdom.
Thanks, Michael.
Thanks.